of the Diversity, Equity, and Anti-Racism Subcommittee for Thursday, March 24th, calling to order. Right now, we'll go to the first approval of the March 8th minutes, but did Malia join yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. I know she had some updates on these minutes, and I think if anybody else have some updates, because there was a little bit of a logistics that she corrected. And then I'd like, when she joins in, I'd like her to give us like a background of the meeting from last week. So for those who didn't attend, they can get a summary. But in the meantime,
Asma, is that me you're talking about?
Yes, Malia, thank you. So before we actually go on to the approval of the minutes, can you give us a summary of what happened at the last meeting?
You know, I think the minutes were fairly accurate. I think it might be easier to kind of summarize as we get to each agenda item, kind of where we left off, in the interest of time. I know the one thing that people may not know if they weren't there is that the harassment policy discussion, we were going to invite the attorney to the next meeting, and he wasn't able to attend tonight. And so that is what the April 5th meeting is for now. So we won't get to that in detail tonight. And that's why we're not ignoring it. We wanted his input because of the detail of what he sent. We thought that made the most sense. And the other items that are on tonight's agenda, I actually think it makes more sense to kind of, unless someone has specific questions, to touch on them as we get to them, and I can kind of summarize where we left off.
Sounds good. If that's the case, I can take a motion to the approval of the minutes of last time you guys met.
So moved.
Anybody second?
Second.
Awesome. Any discussion, changes on the meeting minutes?
Did you see the logistical items that I had noted?
Yep.
One about attendance and one about not doing roll call votes.
Yep.
Yeah. Maybe, do you want to just say those, Malia? Because not everybody saw that.
There was just the attendance was the people absent and the administrators were blank. And so I just wanted to make sure those were accurate. I think Asma and Linda Woodland were the people that were absent. Did I miss anyone else? I think everyone else was there for some or portion of it. And then the administrators were just Brendan, I think, if I recall.
I'll make those corrections. Yeah.
And then the vote said roll call vote, and we actually, because we were all in person, we did not roll call vote. We just voted.
Good catch.
I mean, it's a template because that's what we do at almost every meeting, but yeah, we didn't for once.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So if everybody is ready, I believe we had a second to the motion. I'll do a roll call vote. So let's start from the top. Member Christenbaum.
Aye.
Member Woodland. Okay, maybe I'm reading this wrong. Brett.
Aye.
Linda.
Aye.
Malia. Okay, she gave a thumbs up. I'm assuming that's an aye.
Yeah.
Krista.
Is that what we're saying now? We're saying aye. We're not.
Yeah.
Okay. Aye.
I think you can say either aye or yes, whichever you prefer.
Whichever you prefer. Did I miss anybody else? Sounds good. And I abstain. So let's move on to our next agenda item. I guess, Brendan, if you'd like to, screen share, we can go over the principles of the work, diversity,
Sure.
equity, and inclusion work.
Sure. Thank you. And am I coming through clearly too? My audio is okay. Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I had to do an update, and you never know what that's going to do. So I'm just going to share a screen here. So this will be a good update on Teachers 21 as well. That's actually weaved into this presentation, and Jane and I will kind of go back and forth. I'll drive on this part, and yeah, there's quite a bit here. And actually, I'm thinking back to when we many of us first started doing these remote meetings when this subcommittee started, and we did a lot of this of kind of weaved in content into our meetings. So glad to do that again, and always like to have this be conversational too and have questions throughout. So diving right in. we'll go through the update about Teachers 21 out of William James College and the PD that they've been doing with our leadership team, which has really been going great. We just had a session today, actually. Principles of diversity and equity and inclusion, and then looking towards the future. A lot of transition going on currently, as far as the school committee configuration and new superintendent and all of this. So wanted to preview some possible steps forward too, so we can reference them when the dust settles there. So one factor that's really, really important in this work is to actually look at the 6 big fears of adult educators. And after we look at these, you'll probably notice that it's not just educators this applies to, it's really anybody that's doing challenging work. So fear of making mistakes, fear that errors will erase prior success, a fear of having weaknesses exposed, and a lot of times that's public. That's a huge fear of educators these days. Fear that asking for assistance will diminish respect. So there is sometimes pressure on educators to, a subtle pressure to act like they know everything, where we would not ever expect that. A fear of looking like a novice goes along with that. And then also a fear of conflict. And as we're looking at expanding our diversity and equity work in the district, it's really important to keep those factors in mind, because this topic is scary for people to dive into, especially with some of the things that come up around public discourse and the conversation these days. So just want to bring that into the room too. And even as school committee members, these things might come up as well, because it's such a public facing thing. So just want to mention that to start out. And just so you know, I can't see everybody because of the way the screen is. So if I'm not gonna be able to see a hand, so just like unmute yourself and interrupt me if you want to jump in at any point. This idea of psychological safety, and this is coming directly out of the work from Teachers 21, is kind of the antidote for those fears there. And this is the kind of, these are the conditions that we want to establish for everybody in the district, not only with the equity work, but just generally. So psychological safety, being comfortable with not knowing, not being right, asking for help, reporting mistakes, and really owning mistakes, re-strategizing quickly after failing, and disagreeing openly and respectfully with colleagues and those with more authority. So in order to have the kind of conversations we need to have around equity, it does have to be a safe, psychologically safe environment for everybody who's involved in that conversation, including all of us here. This is a nice graphic that we used in our trainings with Teachers 21. You can see on the left, we have psychological safety from low to high, and then accountability from low to high. And if you look up to kind of the ideal, that learning zone would be high psychological safety and high accountability, meaning we're creating the conditions for this work to happen. And the accountability is not that negative connotation of accountability that we think of like the gotcha mentality. It's really making sure that we are going towards the goals that we're achieving, and doing that in a way that is sustainable, systematic. If you look down for low psychological safety, low accountability, that's that apathy zone. So when people don't feel safe, they kind of check out. And if they're not being held accountable to goals, then they just are kind of blend into the woodwork and check out. And one more I'll just want to highlight is the high psychological safety but low accountability. That means there's a welcoming environment to have the conversation, but there's not really a clear trajectory in terms of goals. And that is that comfort zone. And that typically perpetuates what we've always done. So when we're in our comfort zone, we kind of do all the things that we've always done. So these are really, really important things to keep in mind. It's not just the technical part of this work. It's actually setting the conditions that people are able to engage in it fully and feel comfortable doing it, because this is really challenging work. Then this idea of getting into the growth zone for people, that there's a danger zone too, and we might be pushing people too far or too fast, and that actually is not where we want any of our educators to be. It's that just right growth zone. And the tricky part with this work is that there's a growth zone for the district, kind of a macro level, and then there's also a growth zone for schools and for teachers in those schools and for students. So it's very different for each person and also for each one of those levels that I mentioned. So that's actually one of the real challenges of doing this work well is finding that just right approach that is good for the district and good at all those other different levels that I mentioned too. And this is a little bit difficult to read, but I did another visual next to contextualize it in the district. So this is, it's called the ecological systems theory, and it's really helpful in thinking about equity work because it's not just what's happening in the district. We have to think about the systems outside of the district as well. And this comes from Bronfenbrenner from social psychology. So it's not just what's happening in our district that we are impacted by. If you start at the outer ring, we have that national, international influence, the local community. I would see school committee as its own ring there, and the district as a whole, schools, classroom, down to the student. And the thing that's really important here is that all of these influences do trickle down to the student and impact them. So that's for both positive and negative things as well. So when there's stress and difficult events going on in the world, that certainly impacts our students, even if they're not consciously aware of it. If we have stress in our local community, or if there's kind of tension at different levels in our local community, our students absolutely are impacted by that. But it's also true for positives too. I mean, if there's cohesion and coming together in the community, that comes down to our students as well. And it's cumulative too. And I think if we were to think about the pandemic too, and especially when it first started, there was stress at all levels here. And all of us were heavily impacted by that. And that's gotten better over time. So it's a really nice way to think about doing equity work, that it doesn't mean that we have to have everything in order and everything ready, I would say positive at all levels, but it definitely does impact if we have tension in the community and tension in these other levels. So I want to pause here for a moment, just anything that I'm putting a lot out there, and just to give some of the context before we get into our specific update.
Brendan, I think this is for me crystallizes some of the work that I'm hoping we'll see more of. I like this presentation. I appreciate some of the elements that's coming out. It makes me feel, my question is, how much work has the district done with regard to understanding growth mindset and both for teachers and for students? Because for me, when you talk about, like the 6 spheres of adult educators, one might also connect that to the 6 spheres of students as well, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And to me, if people have some understanding of growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, both at the student level and at the teacher level, as a community, it feels that there's a natural, connection there that can pave the way for further discussion. So I'm just wondering if there's been any work in that regard, and if there's any plan to have that in the works to kind of pave that way and kind of open the dialogue of, we can all be learners here.
Yeah, absolutely, Laura. So it's funny that you mentioned, so growth mindset, for those of you who don't know, the summary of it would be that mistakes are not seen as negative. They're actually seen as opportunities for growth, just like Laura said. So that's kind of at the heart of it. There's a lot more to it. It's funny though, we were having our session today with Teachers 21, Laura, and mistakes actually became something that we added to the norms for that group, as for the principals and for our admin team, our cabinet team, because there is that perfectionism that I think is we expect of ourselves as administrators, and that's the piece. Like, mistakes are happening. They can happen all the time. We try to obviously minimize how big those are and not have any major ones, but with so many moving parts in such a large district. So it was really nice actually this morning to have that come into the conversation really explicitly on our admin team. And just the character traits that we've been using for the opening plan, the quarterly character traits is very much embedded into that as well, because if we give each other a little bit of I'll say wiggle room, it can go a long way too, and just not overreacting when mistakes happen. So I'm glad you bring that up frequently, and I appreciate it, because it is the mindset that creates psychological safety, and it's so easy to do. And I know you probably use it in your work as well. Okay. Anything else before
I had a quick question really to that.
Yeah.
I know that many people in our district do at least know the phrase growth mindset. I have heard it many times. In my personal experience, it's been somewhat inconsistent, and it's also kind of a buzzword at the moment. So I think a lot of people use the term, but may not understand how it's applied. And I don't know if our teachers have had training in that. So I'll be curious to see where this goes. That's not a criticism. It's just I've noticed, I mean, we have 13 schools. Everyone does their own thing a lot of times. I think some are more aware of it than others. So I think that's something to note going forward. I also wonder, and this is more probably related to the next steps. What are we planning to do? But when I'm hearing all this, I'm thinking, goodness, I know administration has a group of this. I would love to entertain the thought of perhaps the school committee having some of this at some level, because we are making decisions that impact the rest of this ecosystem, and we really need to understand and be on the same page if this is something that we value. I know that's impossible to do now, and that will be beyond you, but I would love to see the groundwork laid for that, as something perhaps for the next school committee to do at least a high level of some of this training. It would have been, if it had been an opportunity, I would have loved to have made it available to us this year to jump in like a little subgroup or something, but obviously that wasn't discussed. But because we're making decisions for everyone, and I think that would be really helpful.
And I mean, that's kind of what we're getting at here. We did a lot more of this at the beginning of the subcommittee, and it kind of fell away, but the idea is that to make sure that this subcommittee and all of you have the content, most of the content that we're doing with the principals, so it's a loop. So, and I think you'll see as I go through, there's a lot of that there, and it's very future oriented. So, and I'm just going to click into the next section, with the time in mind. But and this window of stress tolerance, we use this all the time. We actually have used this, I know, a while ago here, just to see where people are, because stress is a very real part of this work. So just getting into the professional development with William James. These are our trainers who've been working with us, Chris and Gabby, she goes by. They've been really great. And Jane, you may have things to add too. I mean, that's a very simple way to put it. But when we look for strong professional development organizations, we like to see places that will be responsive. Like if we have requests for certain content to be included or not included, that's always really helpful, especially around this topic. And they've been just fantastic with that, and really skilled facilitators too, that have been guiding some great conversations with the principals.
Right. And we'll also have our work centered around a text that we're reading, and they've done a nice job of bringing that in, along with a lot of other types of articles and reference information. So great discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. And the text is the one that's listed here, and I'm holding it up. But 5 practices for equity focused school leadership by RAD and others, published by ASCD. Really good guide, very user friendly. And the really nice part, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, is that SEL is completely embedded into the training. So we're SEL is the driver, is the vehicle for diversity and equity and inclusion in this model and in the training. So it's really, I mean, they're so intertwined. You can see here, these domains, self-awareness, the ones down the left. On the right, it shows the skills that are really needed to do this work well. And that's just some of them. That's not all of them. But the overlap is just huge between those two. So DEI and SEL. So that has just been really good, especially being the SEL director. So I'm just going to go back here. And some of this I will, I'll skip over a few slides, but I want to be sure to share this all with you. Yeah, so we've had training sessions that actually began last May with Teachers 21. So we have a nice relationship with them. We just had our session today. It was our fourth one with them, and principals and district leadership participated in that. And I've already talked about the SEL overlap. And the focus is on sustainable systemic change using data review and action planning. And that, in the first session that we had related to equity, we looked at district-wide data. And I know we've been talking about that on this subcommittee. And the principals looked at their data, and we used some protocols for actually interpreting that. Because that's actually a really difficult skill to interpret data in a way that is not biased and that we see what it really is and not what we want it to be. You know, bias does play into it. What's nice too is, you know, our principals they've been fantastic throughout the pandemic, and that can't be said enough. Like they've just like many of us, they've put aside whatever they were doing at any hour of the day or night, weekends, to do what needed to be done. So there's articles now coming out about school leadership in disruptive times and around COVID specifically, and how leadership really is so different now than it was before. And we're still adjusting in a lot of ways. And just a few quotes here I'll read. So leading a school through the changes and challenges that accompany COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 will require school leaders to put their own health and well-being first so that they will be able to help others. That analogy of putting on the oxygen mask on the plane, yours first so you can help others, is really, really important because burnout is very real at all levels. Change management will require support, very sensitive mouse, will require support and collaboration from all staff. That's more important than ever, coming together. And a high degree of trust will be needed as the collective glue to ensure that issues are addressed collectively as they arise. So this idea of relational trust is super important in this diversity work, and just understanding that there will be bumps in the road, but we need to come back together. We can't ever write anybody else off. Nobody can be on our bad list. We need to stick together in this work. That is, I would highlight that as a really important future consideration as this work rolls out in the district. And I'll talk about some anticipated bumps in the road that we know from other districts. Those are going to happen, and we just keep moving forward in a way that is brave and also on behalf of kids. So nice articles coming out actually that are really validating for our leaders, and this is brought into our trainings as well. And in order for equity to be embedded, and I'll let you know if a slide is not from the training that we've been doing with the principals, but all of these have been. Transformational leadership is what we're going for here. And that's individual, interactive, and influential levels. And that means breaking out of a comfort zone, status quo, moving away from that, trying new skills through many experiments, then reflecting. And that is really scary to do, you know, especially as leaders, we have a lot of responsibilities. And when things are going smoothly, there is a temptation just to keep it going that way. And introducing the topic of the DEI is potentially upsetting to a school community. And that's why all these conditions are so important to have in place. Emotions, we would look at as data and psychological safety. Again, you're hearing that theme. And this is really important. This accountability piece, it's moving away from a deficit model or a gotcha model to a capacity building model. And Laura, capacity building that implies growth mindset, because that means we're not going to have everything we need in place. We're going to need to add things. We're going to need to experiment, as it says, and try new things. And that deficit model, it's so easy to fall into that trap of pointing out when mistakes happen and admiring problems. But when we switch to this capacity building model, it transforms an entire district. There's also some really nice things written about moving away from the language of complaint to the language of commitment. And all of these things are just really important, not just for equity. Like now it's like more global to what's good for the district and doing anything that requires us to come together. So I'll pause for another moment because there's a lot of content here. which I think is great because you're seeing like the content that the principals are getting, and it's very rich. So
Yeah,
any thoughts?
I like the word choices. You know, deficit versus capacity reminds me more of reactive versus perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Right. Yeah, that capacity building, that means planning. You know, that's not,
Looking
we
forward.
can't just, yeah, in a way that is, um, exists in documents. I mean, we're thinking strategic plan here as well, and school improvement plans. That's where this all will end up living, you know? Yeah, thanks, Brett.
Thank you.
Yeah, it makes me think of talking with my kids. You know that saying about all I ever needed to learn, I learned in kindergarten, right? So you know, thinking about that positive, catching our kids being good, and you know, building on that positive energy, and like if something
Completely.
goes wrong, that okay, it was a bad choice, but
Yeah,
we can do
absolutely.
better. Yeah.
You know, it's funny too, because sometimes that approach gets framed as like the warm, fuzzy, kind of new wavy. It's really not. I mean, accountability also means like correcting behavior, right? So like their accountability means like it's not a free for all. Like there are some parameters and there's an expectation. So yeah, it does kind of, in districts I've been in the past, as kids get older, it can become more of a deficit model, like in the middle and high school. You know, we have to watch that tendency because we can tend to treat kids like mini adults as they go up. So thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, so DESE has put out some really good language on culturally responsive teaching and leading that we are using in our trainings. They're really they're hitting it, in my opinion, exactly the way it should be. There's a lot of language here, but I do want to just highlight some of it, and you'll have access to the slides after as well. So what is cultural responsiveness? I guess is really important to know. And they define it as an approach to viewing students' culture and identity, including their race, ethnicity, multilingualism, and other characteristics as assets, not as detriments, but as assets, and creating learning experiences and environments that value and empower them. So this is tied to school culture and district culture, very much so. And it really means like, this is empathy all tied in here, and it means knowing the students that are in front of us and who they actually are and who they want us to know they are. So it's a nice definition there, and this is what we're using in our trainings. And you can see who is the thought leader on that. So culturally responsive teaching and leading promotes 3 outcomes that support student learning: academic achievement, cultural competence, and socio-political awareness. Okay. And this goes back to kind of those rings that I was saying, you know, the Bronfenbrenner model. Like kids really need to have an opportunity to talk about the world that they live in, right? And that is sometimes where controversy can come in, right? Because things are viewed through a political lens these days more so than ever. But we really need to give kids an opportunity in school to talk about issues that are on their minds. And the world is happening around them, and sometimes upsetting events are happening around them. Schools can and always have really been a place to have those conversations happen in a contained way. You know, I think the difference now is it's so political as far as the rhetoric and the public discourse that I think there's a guardedness maybe sometimes, not just in our community, but nationally, I'd say, over, you know, a political motives occurring in schools. But if we look at it through this model, it makes total sense for those issues to come up in the classroom and to be spoken about in a way that's really objective and balanced, right? Because kids need to know. I mean, this is the world they live in, and the news certainly is flooded with things that can be confusing for kids and adults, I'd say. But this nicely encapsulates the work in a way that I think is neutral and you know, tied to academic achievement, which is really important. And I'll go on. There's a little bit more on culturally responsive. Yeah, so just research that DESE has referenced. When educators are responsive to students' cultures and identities, students have stronger relationships with educators, better learning experiences, and better outcomes. And the ultimate goal is to strengthen student learning and achievement. And this goes back to a lot of the work we've done with Panorama too, to look at how connected students feel to their school community, right? And that we had our second survey go out just a few months ago, and we'll have another one at the end of the year. So that's a really nice way that we have a measure that principals are using in their planning. So we do have some nice foundational pieces in place, which is really good. The two parts that are important here too, technical work. So that means we think of the head and the heart here. So technical skills we might think of as being cognitive. Adaptive work is more the feeling, social, connectedness part of things. Both are equally important in doing this kind of work, which is why SEL is what we're using to drive it. This one might be a little difficult to see, but this comes from DESE as well. And we, I know you might have to squint a little bit. I tried to take at least a high quality screenshot. You can see on the left, we have, this is a continuum, cultural destructiveness on the left into culturally sustaining on the right. And it's a way of self-assessing where we might be as a district currently. And we did get some feedback from our trainers from Teachers 21 that in many ways, we're actually pretty close to cultural proficiency on certain indicators. We are actually doing a really nice job on so actually this body can take credit for a lot of this too. So behaving in ways and enacting policies that lead to bias-free environments that are respectful of diverse backgrounds, strengths, and challenges. So our gender identity policy that will be up for vote soon is certainly in line with that. We have a lot more work to do. That's why we're still a subcommittee. So in some ways, if we were to be, really honest, we'd probably say we're more at cultural pre-competence. And that just has to do with kind of a mindset of saying, like, we need to learn more about this as as individuals and also as a collective. So yeah, I mean, it was kind of encouraging actually to see this continuum, because there are many different levels over here on the left that we are, at least at the administrative level and school committee level, there are no indicators of that. So thoughts on this continuum? It might be a little tricky to read.
As I'm reading this, it occurred to me that sometimes people saying things like to a child that might come from a different culture or different religion, saying things like, "Oh, do you have anything that you celebrate in December?" without realizing that they're coming from their own background. And sometimes children feel like, well, I'm not celebrating anything in December. Is there something wrong with that? That's a common question. And I know it's done out of like learning and out of concern and out of like wanting to understand, but it could be phrased better.
Yeah. And those are, getting feedback on making comments like that too. You can just imagine that having that psychological safety, like knowing that whoever's giving that feedback really has good intent to say, maybe think about a different way to phrase that. I'm glad you brought that up, Asima, because you can think of all these scenarios and, with some trust and, positive school culture, we're able to give that kind of feedback and then shape people's behavior, because it starts with the individual and then that becomes collective over time. And I think your point too, Asima, and that is really kind of like an unintentionally maybe offensive comment, right? It's something that is well-meaning but ends up potentially having a negative outcome.
Right. It also shows that sometimes we're coming from our boxes of what we're used to, even though we're trying to understand another box, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Expand that box and expand our understanding. So I think it's usually done in a good intention, but sometimes it may make the child feel like, wait, am I missing something? I don't get to celebrate the same things that other people celebrate at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I think using this continuum too, as we self-assess going forward as a district, it's a good place to look. And there's other indicators as well, but this is a simplified version of it. So anyways, I don't want to spend too much time there. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I apologize. While you're just on that culturally responsive continuum, for our May 9th District Professional Development Day, we actually contracted with Teachers 21, and they're going to provide 2 sessions on that topic, culturally responsive instructional practices, that all staff could sign up for. So we just published all the different offerings, and that's a big one that I'm excited about.
Definitely.
Among all many, but it's a really good one and timely.
I think it'll be well attended too, because that was a request of our teachers. Many of them want training in this too. And the important thing with that style of teaching, it's good for students of color, and it's also good for all students. So that's a really important piece here, that you know, rising tide lifts all boats. So it really is you know, good for everybody. A lot of these practices are. So okay. All right, told you there was a lot. So you asked for an update, and you're getting an update. Okay. So with SEL, I went over this already. And actually, this comes directly from our first meeting as a subcommittee, which was so long ago. We talked about school culture and put this definition up. It's the way that teachers and other staff members work together and the set of beliefs, values, and assumptions they share. A positive school climate and school culture promotes students' ability to learn. And we had this too, which I think it's good to revisit now, so long after. These indicators as being potentially things we could use in strategic planning for a district, that we would look to create a school culture and a district culture in which every student and adult in the school community feels a sense of belonging, connection, and safety. Parents and guardians are in partnership with the schools and that their children attend. Differences are explored with a sense of curiosity and appreciation, and conflict is resolved proactively and in ways that restore relationships and increase empathy. And there's probably many others, but I think when we first started the subcommittee, we were looking for maybe like a definition of like, what are we aiming for? And at that time, we were aiming for this. So, you know, when I was looking back at our old content, I said, oh yeah, that's so. Anything related to school culture, or I mean, because I don't feel like this has changed much. There might be additional ones we add once we get to strategic planning, but you know, these still seem very timely.
Well, I thought
Oh,
it
they
was
do.
interesting that the definition
ahead, school culture referred only to, well, it said school culture refers to the way teachers and other staff members work together, et cetera. It doesn't say anything about the kids, except that you're supposed to promote students' ability to learn. And I feel like kids are part of school culture also. The perspectives they come into school with have an influence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's something that should be in the definition too, Linda. I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Malia, what are you saying?
I was going to say, so I know that Jane just said that, I know the administrators are going through this training, and I know that Jane just said that some professional development sessions will be connected to this and available on this. But is something like this school culture piece, is this something that's being conveyed to all the schools throughout our district, or is it something that just the small group of administrators is getting? Like, I'm curious kind of where that stands.
Yeah, we're still at that foundational level, right? And coming into this year, knowing that we would be getting a new superintendent and that we would have to, you know, really figure out where that person would want to go with these. We decided that this would be I think a logical place to start, getting the, you know, common language, common understanding amongst our administrators, our principals. And then absolutely with that goal, Malia, I'm sure that a lot of this work is already coming into our schools, and I'm hearing about that from our principals. But the systemic part of it and the sustainable part, that's the next step. And that's tied to strategic plan. So a while ago, I used an analogy of building a house. Like this is still foundation. Like we might be framing a little bit here, but it's still pouring the concrete. So, but absolutely, that's where we need to go next. Yeah, and actually, I talked about that at the end too, about what the future will look like, maybe. So, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Some of you might have seen this cartoon before, but for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. And you can see we've got a little bird, the monkey, the elephant, right? And this is meant to provoke some thought about expectations and its intention versus action. So we would think about the difference between equality and equity. equality in education. So we provide schools for all students. We have schools set up for all students. That's the equality part. Equity helps us to make sure that those equal opportunities are adjusted. So that is allowing for accommodations to happen for even tier 1 regular ed teaching practices to be done in a way, we could think of universal design for learning as one way to do that, to be done in a way that all students can access. So so that's just a way to think about, and a cartoon that we use in our training that gives people a little chuckle, but then also gets them to think, what might that mean in my school? Diversity as a means towards equity too. So on the left side, diversity, if we're using an analogy, we might say that's being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Belonging is picking a song, and equity as getting to DJ and pick the music. So play the music. So that's a nice way to think about empowerment as well. That sometimes districts, we can get stuck on like that left side of just diversity and not really getting to equity, which is the ultimate goal. So this book was one that Daryl had already been working on prior to the pandemic with the principals, Unconscious Bias in Schools by Benson and Fireman. So that was a nice foundation. Actually, we got feedback from our trainers that helped a lot, because you can't do equity work without talking about bias. And now we're into the book that we just mentioned, Equity Focused Leadership. And the 5 practices that are in this book: preparing for equity, which is where we are. And that's kind of, I'm thinking what you said, Malia, too, like it is preparing to do this work. Developing equity leadership teams, building equity focused systems, sustaining equity, and prioritizing equity leadership. So it's a real nice roadmap for where we will end up going. And again, we're just in those initial stages right now.
Brendan, maybe then jumping the gun here for just a moment, but
Sure.
You've just mentioned two texts here that I find are piquing my curiosity. I haven't read these publications yet, but it seems to me that I ought to.
You there, Laura? You're breaking up.
Maybe as a response to this presentation, a recommendation to the school committee, if you think that that's appropriate, of one or both of those texts, or if at some future point we have a little recommendation of a reading that might help our school committee understand.
Right, and the timing of that, I wonder about, because it sounds like that would be a really good thing to do, especially where it gives common language. That's a nice part about using a book. We could just think about maybe the best time to do that, given our transition here.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense.
Before we leave today, I did want to mention to the committee, there is I sent this to Brendan. There is something coming up this weekend virtually about a forum on equity and DEI work in schools in North Central Mass. So I did want to share that with you all before we go off on a tangent, but I can share it at the end.
Yeah, and we could email that out too. I'll send it to everybody for sure. Okay, moving right along. So 10 high leverage standards for educational leadership for equity. I won't read these. There's 5 here and 5 on the next page. Just give me a moment. This was nice. We're actually using a couple different frameworks too, and that way we have some choice when we get to the strategic planning part of things. There are different ways to go about this work. A lot of similarities between them. The continual improvement model is kind of embedded to all of them. This is something that we did early on too as well, but this idea, we mentioned about the biases. So this idea that invisible beliefs and attitudes, if they're not made conscious, if they're kind of kept in the background, it becomes actions and outcomes that are automatic. And bias is a big part of this. And bias versus discrimination. Bias is really, they can be typically are unconscious and they're a blind spot unless we really pay close attention to them. They're passive. Where discrimination is active, it's usually you can see it and hear it. It's you know it when you see it. And discrimination is, rarer than bias. Bias is really something we all hold. And this is going way back for this group, and some of you weren't on it, but we actually went through these different kind of biases too. It's not just racial and cultural bias, which can be difficult for people to identify in themselves. Like that's hard. That's a hard one for us to admit that we hold those. That's hard. However, we might be more likely to say negativity bias, for example, and teachers will understand this. Like that's if you have a student in your room who tends to do a certain behavior or disruptive behavior, if you hear a sound, you tend to look at that student first. Right. So that is a bias, it's an automatic thing. And that one we can laugh about, and I heard a laugh because we all
sorry, I was internalizing that.
Well, but I'm glad you did that, because that's an example of like when we have these conversations around bias, we would start with that one, right? Not start with racial cultural bias, because that's a difficult one for us to think about. And also aggression, conflict, aversion bias too. There is a tendency, all of us have this, of avoiding conflict and shying away from aggression in others. Like we have this kind of self-protective thing that kicks in. That is just human nature and reflexive. And, so as we're looking at bias, we would think about these ones that are a little bit less personal and honestly less painful to admit that we hold. This was from today's content, and I want to mention it because stress is still very high, right? I know that seems pretty obvious, but I think we're used to the way the world is right now, but I think stress is still very high, higher than it was pre-pandemic, I would say. When experiencing acute stressors, people's decisions and behaviors are more likely to be influenced by biases and shortcuts that lead to differential treatment of others. So when we're stressed, we tend to, our biases become more pronounced and impact our behavior more. That's everybody. And that classroom example I just mentioned, I think that's certainly true. If we come into a classroom and we're stressed, that negativity bias is going to be amplified. It's going to be like through the roof of like, we might be more irritable. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind too, that, and to make sense of world events too. I mean, we won't go too far down into those right now, but if we think about the collective stress across the country, and then we look at some of the events that have happened that are bias motivated, this theory makes sense. And this was just out of today's content.
Brendan, is there there's something behind that circle that is highlighted green? I can't make that out. Is that
the one right above? Yeah, educators who do not feel adequately valued, supported, or efficacious are 15 times more likely to leave the profession. Okay. Is that one right?
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah, it's a little hard to read with the colors, I know.
But I think it's noteworthy.
Yeah. Yeah, stress needs to be talked about explicitly in all this work. And actually, during training sessions, we would check in on stress because certain topics heighten it, and then people shut down and don't hear anything. So anyways, yeah, so you're really getting kind of a flavor of like what we're getting in the content. And, thinking about going towards the future, which, and these are just some thoughts that I wanted to put out there. So as we're doing this work, I think it's important to think about the reality of some of the reactions and what we can expect, because that way, when it happens, or if it happens, we're not caught flat-footed and we don't think, what do I do now? So there will be many people in our district communities who support the continuation of DEI work in the district. Some parents will have questions about DEI work in the district and how it will impact their children. And that's really good. We need to be just open about what our plans are so parents understand. And there are some people in our district communities who will decide not to support DEI in the district. And it's kind of a reality, right? There's a lot of reasons for that. And, it may not be helpful to get into all of those reasons, but that is true with any kind of change, right? There's sometimes a structure that's used in systemic change. They say 80-10-10. So that means 80% of people will be supportive. And these are just, numbers to play with. 10% will bend over backwards to make sure that it's a success. And then 10% will not be supportive. And that's obviously, those numbers are, not scientific, but it's a way of thinking about what consensus really is. So how we deal with that too, especially people who might not be supportive, we want to make sure that we have as much of a universal approach to this that looks at all students, right? It looks at how this approach will benefit all students, not just students of color in our district. Because we're preparing our kids to go into a global society, and not even to go into it. I mean, we could have somebody on this call from another country right now, like if we wanted to. Like, it's a global world. You don't have to. There's no letter writing that we have to do anymore. So we do really need to understand that it is a bigger world than just our 5 towns, and prepare our students to do that. So when I am talking to people that might be maybe nervous or in some cases scared about DEI, try to look at what's universal, how it will actually benefit their child to be successful when they leave us. And that's, I think, really what it's all about. The social part is huge, and we have to be able to accept people for who they are, on the terms of who they are. So anyways, that is just a reality, that we will have people who just, even after having the information, will not support it. But we want to make sure that we have really a transparent rollout of this initiative so that people really understand it. Let's pause there for a moment.
So you're going to roll this out after the new superintendent comes, or what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it's not my decision when it gets rolled out, but it would, typically where like the next steps will be decided usually in conjunction with the strategic plan. And
yes.
So the timing of it is always the question, and I wouldn't want to answer that.
Right, that makes sense. So the other thing is, I was just listening to a podcast tonight about, and one of the speaker, Mark Hamill something or other, forget his name, or Mark Lamont something. Anyway, he's articulated something that it's been on my mind, which is the way that basically some people use the term critical race theory to label pertaining to a discussion about race. And I don't know, given that, if it's possible to prevent what we're trying to do in this district is labeled as critical race theory. But, I don't know. I just hate to see it get, I'm sort of expecting that any discussion at all regarding equity is going to meet with that kind of language and that kind of opposition.
Yeah, and I guess that falls under maybe that second bullet too, because there might be questions around what is this, right? What are we doing? And going back to the previous slides around what the DESI model, that's a really good fit, and it does look at history, right? So what the lightning rod that critical race theory has become, usually anytime if there's something about a historical, like racism in history, that the quick categorization that happens sometimes is, oh, that's critical race theory, where no, it actually ties into social studies standards. And that is part, I remember going to school talking about that and reading books about Abraham Lincoln and all of that. So the problem, and that actually gets to some of the fear that people feel too, because that is a lightning rod right now, but it also gets at like us being clear that that's not what we're doing. It's actually this culturally responsive piece, which is very different. It's a totally different model, and it's about calling people in, not calling people out.
Right.
Put it that way. So yeah, it's a good example of something that can come up. Right.
I think also I remember when I was running for my seat last year, somebody asked us about critical race theory. The actual question was, without defining it, tell us what you think of critical race theory. And I don't know. I said something like, well, I don't know how you answer a question when you can't define the concept. But anyway, I muttered something at one point about people not being aware of their own biases. And one of the other candidates who shall remain nameless, but whom everyone knows, um, said something about, he said, well, there you go, unconscious bias, in this kind of dismissive sort of way. As if, clearly he thought that unconscious bias was, something that didn't exist, or that it was, kind of.
Yeah, and part of this is like continual conversations, like always coming back to the table and trying to understand, right? So
Right.
that is why this work is so labor intensive, is because it requires that, like, okay, we have different ideas about this. Let's actually talk about the substance, and that can happen at many different levels. So, but what it starts with, and getting to this slide, it's a clear understanding of what are we doing and why, and being open about that. So, no, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, Linda. And I see, let me see the order here. Linda Woodland, I think was it.
Yeah. So along with what Linda said, I think that something to keep in mind is that a lot of what is happening at this level of education seems to be more in line with following standpoint theory of the value of looking at the same moment of history, but from another standpoint. That every person involved brings value to the understanding of a historic moment. And so that I think that's a description that I've seen have a clarifying effect when people have questions about, I've heard about the CRT thing and what's happening in schools, and just saying it's about different standpoints. It's about different, there's always things to be learning about a moment in the past.
Absolutely. And Linda, there's this idea of empathic imagination, like putting ourselves into the shoes of somebody else. And kids love that. They love being able to say, okay, in this time in history, what was it like to be a member of this group, a member of that group? That's actually, I can think back to projects when I was a kid too. Like that was always really exciting because you're going outside your comfort zone, and the empathy that you need to do that, you need to have a deep understanding of the circumstances that people were living in and their emotional state. So yeah, standpoint theory is a nice way to put it too, because the hard part too is like it does, because it's so heated in terms of like not just critical race, but anything around this. It does create kind of a chilling effect for educators, where they're nervous to bring up these topics too. And out of context, and I'll just use myself as an example. So if somebody were to soundbite part of this hour-long presentation that I'm making you all go through, there could be parts of it that could be taken out of context and absolutely twisted into something they weren't, right? And that's the kind of thing that gets people worried, and educators worried, especially during remote learning, because their teaching was actually in their living rooms of their students and things. So I just kind of want to have a lot of empathy for educators too, because it is hard, and they want to be able to have these kind of conversations with kids around difficult topics. But so anyways, we can, as a district, we can help pave the way for that, and it comes with having a solid plan. But Linda, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up too, though, because that, I mean, I completely see where you're saying about that chilling effect. I think that's really worrying to have, right? We don't want our educators to be chilled from doing what they know they need to be doing, right? So is there something, and maybe not like right now, but I think that that's something that's really important to have on the school committee's radar, to continuously provide that support, and knowing if something were to happen, that the school committee would have the backs of the educators doing this important work. We would, I guess that's, I think, a larger question for the group, is just to make sure that we are there as support, not just, squares on the screen.
I think that would, I mean, that's great to hear too, Linda, and how that gets, that probably will take us down a different direction, but I think we just hang on to that idea and keep it in mind. I appreciate that. Let's see, Laura and then Malia.
Thanks, Brandon. I just wanted to say that when I think about this work, it's easy perhaps to think of it as an anti-racism, a heavy anti-racism kind of tilt, if you will, or focus. But in a broader context, really what we're talking about is incorporating a lens that helps us ensure that diversity in all aspects, whether it be socioeconomic, disabilities, gender, those are just as much a part of this work as racism, religion, as the race and the religion piece of it, at least as I understand this.
Completely.
And this is for me, when I look at this work, this is giving the district and our operations and our policies and our institutional practices an opportunity to reflect in a mirror what we may do in our practices, in our policies, and in our standard operating procedures that may inadvertently disregard any one of those folks that identify in any category that is traditionally marginalized. For example, ensuring just thinking about diversity of disability, making sure that when we have images of people in sciences, for example, that we are also looking at people who may have various disabilities. A scientist could be in a wheelchair, for example. A scientist could be a female. A scientist could be all these other things than the traditional image of what I went to school and experienced as a young person in our school, in a school system, not this school system, but in a different school system. And so when I see this work, it's not just about racism or diversity of religion. To me, it's a much broader opportunity to build capacity to ensure that we are an inclusive group. And I hope that people will take the time, and I believe that we as a body must take the time to effectively communicate that to the staff, to the community, and so on and so forth, so that they understand that it is our obligation through the standards that DESE puts forth to provide an equitable learning environment for all of our students.
Yeah, those overlaps are so important, Laura, right? And if we're talking about one group, it's for the purpose of lifting up other groups as well. That's right. Those overlaps that's what's great about this framework. It really is. It's good for all students, and especially students who would, as you said, be marginalized, potentially marginalized. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Malia, go right ahead. And then we'll go to this next slide next.
I have two things. One overlaps actually with what Laura just said, so I won't repeat most of that. And the other actually ties into, I don't even remember who said it now, so I'm sorry. My brain is forgotten. The other ties into the fact of being in other people's shoes, because one of the things, and I don't know, I mean, this ties into bigger curriculum discussions, but when I think about that, I think of a couple things. Like when my son was in elementary school, one of the biggest, most meaningful experiences he had, elementary and middle school, were interactive, experiential. Like when they do at the elementary school, before COVID, hopefully they'll do it again, they did the interactive immigration experience, and I volunteered at that and helped plan it, so I know the details of that. mean, it wasn't just on paper. They actually learned a lot of things. They were actually in the shoes. There were kids that cried because they got turned away from different stations. There were kids that couldn't write because in whatever language they were supposed to have. Like, there were real challenges that they saw, and some of them got quite upset about, which is, you know, an interesting thing, but they were part of the talking about it and the experience. And the kids learned a lot from that. In middle school, I remember in his history class, they did something where they were learning about trade routes in Asia years ago. And I don't know all the details because it was middle school, but they actually for like 3 weeks took on different roles in that process and different conflicting things and issues, and had to play those roles as they learned about the material. You know, so there's things like that that can directly tie into the standards and the things they're already learning about that I would love to see us do more of. Because these are both like, they're add-ons. They're things that are done extra. They're not, the whole year is not built that way. And I know it's because they teach to the test, but I can tell you that at least my kid learned a lot more from these experiences than they do studying worksheets. And the teacher in middle school who took 3 weeks to do it in the middle of the year to teach the concepts, of course, that was social studies. There isn't an MCAS in social studies, so I guess they could. I think it was so meaningful for the kids. And I remember, in terms of tying into Laura's question, I remember when I was actually in elementary school, I mean, this is something stick with you. I was in like 3rd or 4th grade, and we were in Providence, and there's a school in Providence for students with disabilities for the state. It's not a state-run school, it's a nonprofit, but it's very well known. And they actually did an outreach program where they had some of their students, some of their teachers come into the school, create, you know, talk about some of their disabilities, talk about their experiences, how they were different than ours. And we actually had activities they did with us, and it stuck with me to this day, like so much that I gave them money in a telethon when I was 10 out of my piggy bank because I appreciated their work. We actually had experiences where they facilitated, like, what is it like if you can't hear something? What is it like if your student can't see? What if you have a physical disability and you have to just walk down the hall to the bathroom? Like, there were challenges. It was learning about differences and learning about how other people were different than us, but still very similar. And it stuck with me to this day. And I know not everyone has that perspective of a school like that does that, but things like that to connect students to other students' experiences, I think are really useful.
And just even, you know, how impactful they are on us as adults. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that, you know, as we move forward in this work, I mean, those are great SEL activities and also really good for diversity. So I do want to.
The other thing is, wait till you're done. When you're done with the topic, I'll have one other question. So.
Sorry, I just realized like 8:10, and we're having a really good conversation, so I didn't want to stifle that. But I also know there's other things on the agenda. So I'll just put all these out in one shot here. So yeah, the idea that these the DEI will be more visible in school improvement plans and the strategic plan, that is how we'll know that's really getting embedded. DEI focus will serve as the foundation for SEL, inclusionary practices, to your point, Malia, and school culture and climate initiatives. Our district DEI work will positively impact all students. So it's funny, you anticipated some of these things, and improve school and district culture and climate. And our administrators and educators across the district will need continued support to do this work, that it's not just a workshop and then you do it. It's continual. So these are all just really important things. So that is pretty much the end of it. I did want to just put this as kind of a validating slide here of some things we're already doing. This came from today's workshop. So what are actionable opportunities? Quality teachers, material resources, course offerings, policies related to us that provide equitable access. That is very much our charge, and practices that promote inclusion. So we reflected on that at today's session about what might your school community be ready to handle, and that was a discussion. So because there's different starting points that might be different at each building, given how big our district is. So, okay, so that was a lot. I know I am going to stop presenting, and there might be some lingering thoughts that we can get to.
I think Asima's left, just for the record. So she did message me and ask me to continue running the meeting. So we're good. She told me she might have to leave.
Yeah, you have your gavel. No, just kidding.
Yeah, sure. But I also have a question. So I guess my question is, I'm glad to hear all of this. I'm glad to see all of this. I think it would have been, I wish we had seen it earlier in the year so that we could have figured out ways to, although we weren't meeting, but ways to do more to integrate the school committee work into this. And raise awareness on that level, which is why we kind of exist. I am glad that we are doing so much. So finally, our policies are broader than just race. So I think we have that broad viewpoint, and I think we're heading in a good direction. But what I would really like to see us do, whether it's now briefly throwing out some ideas or at our next meeting as an agenda item, perhaps. I don't know. I'm happy to do it now too. But I think it would be helpful to talk about as a committee what kinds of things we think we would like to be doing. Like we've talked about a book recommendation. Some of us have talked about just wanting to make this more visible to the rest of the committee. Well, how do we do that? Do we do a book recommendation? Do we include some of this in our report, maybe? And go over some of it at the meeting? Do we have a discussion with the superintendent and the incoming superintendent, like a formal discussion in the near future about these topics? I think we need to create some action steps of the direction that this committee might want to go beyond just policies, which we are working on, to really try to build some of this into the work we do.
Well, I mean, we're going to have, a new director of SEL. I sad to talk about that, but coming in, we've got a lot of change, but also the whole goal of this work with Teachers 21, with the administrative team, is at the end of our work to come up with an actionable plan of how we're going to move forward. And I would, think then we will be presenting that plan to the new superintendent, catching them up on the work that's been done so far and getting input as to where we want to go. And I think then that will all be presented to this committee. And then that, I think, is the time. I just feel like right now, personally, it's a little premature because the admin team's still learning. Brendan's sharing with you some great stuff that we just learned today and just started to talk about. So I just think we're in that process part. We're not, I think, we need a little more time for that admin team to come up with what those next steps that they recommend are going to be. And that we also have created that buy-in from, our school administrators as to what they believe are the next steps too in their input. So I'd like to do that. And that's going to be over the next few months. And then present an update to this committee where we are, and then talk about that. I think.
I will be curious. I'll be curious to hear what other people have to say, because I do think that obviously the administration and teachers in our schools is a key thing. But I also think as a school committee, there are things that we are a separate entity and we need to talk about some of these issues as a body. So I'll let everyone else talk because I'm just listening now, but that's my thought.
I think Laura has her hand up.
So I just want to say thank you for the froze. Am I there now?
Yeah,
I think I froze.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I just want to thank you for this presentation. I think it was quite comprehensive. It gives me a lot of understanding of the process that you've orchestrated to date with Teacher 21, the partnership that we have there, the conversations that you've had with the leadership team across the schools, and bringing that update to us is really helpful for me to understand where you are in the process and where you feel you need to go in the next steps with this work. So thank you very much. I know that putting this all together during the last couple of years has been problematic simply because you've been stretched so thin with some of the things that were not part of your primary responsibilities, quite frankly, Brandon, that you had to take on during the COVID time. And so you were stretched very, very thin, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate you being able to get this much accomplished during this time. Do I wish it was more? Yes, simply because I know how talented you are and what capacity you did have to share your skill set with us and with the students in our community. And I feel like in many ways we were just, not given the opportunity to see all that you could do simply because you were stretched so thin with the COVID response. I want to thank you for being a part of our community during your tenure here with us. I think you've enriched our community by bringing your skills, your knowledge, and your expertise. You certainly provided us an open door to the next phase of growth for this district. So I appreciate you.
I appreciate that very much. Yeah, I will definitely miss working with you all for sure. And yeah, I mean, sometimes I'm hesitant to take credit for anything. And our admin team in central office, we all do like 10 different things that are above and beyond our. Just we're so small. We have such a small central office. So, but yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And this committee is really doing important work too. So I mean, I know we have some other things tonight on the agenda, but the policy work is huge. And this gender identity policy that's up for another vote could potentially be very comforting to students who have those things on their mind, right? And that I think there's really that's just a start. But thank you, I appreciate what you said.
And we've been really lucky to have you. We really have. Sorry to see you go.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay.
Just to speak
to
Malia, to Malia's point, though, I think, Malia, we can have a conversation about new business to kind of see what we need to do. I think that's a conversation under new business. So I don't want to leave that as a loose end right this moment.
Yeah.
But I think that's where that belongs.
Yep. Good plan. Are there other thoughts before we move on? Since Asim is not here. All right. I see no hands. Did you have other thoughts, Brendan?
No, I think that was plenty.
Okay.
So,
No,
thank
I
you
appreciate
for that.
it. I think that was a really useful discussion. Hopefully Laura will be back with us. Okay. So the next thing on the agenda is the Hate Crimes Resource Guide. At our last meeting, we discussed this briefly, and I don't know that we settled on a strict plan, but we wanted to bring it up again. This may not be the meeting to decide on a plan, but our thought was that we need to look at those pages that are related to our work and make sure that we are covering them. Part of my initial thought when I realized the attorney's coming to our next meeting is perhaps this discussion might go hand in hand with the other discussion while he's with us, to see if he thinks that our various policies, which overlap a lot with the other discussion and the documents that he has sent, which you all haven't seen, I know, but I've seen. He talked about our harassment policy. He talked about our bullying policy. He talked about a couple other things in his comments, and untangling all of that might be relevant to this discussion. If we could maybe ask him to offer his thoughts on whether we are meeting what is covered in these 5 pages that's relevant to our policies and work, or if he thinks we need some additional policies. I don't know how people feel about that, but that was my thought, that it might be useful to get his thoughts on that as well. Silence. That's good. Does that mean no one has thoughts? That's good.
And I'll
Does
be
that sound like,
yeah,
go ahead.
To prep for that next meeting, and Malia and with Asima too, I was going to talk to you both just to make sure we're getting everything to Matt, Attorney McAvoy, in advance. And this could be one of those things too,
Okay.
that he could be prepared to talk about, I'm sure.
I just think it overlaps, at least when I looked at this document, which was a little while ago. I've looked at it a couple months ago again. I think it overlaps with some of the things that he had mentioned. So I just didn't want to, it just seemed logical to me to see if any of it's related instead of having two different discussions. Because he could tell us we're meeting it all and then we're good. We don't have to discuss it again. So, okay. All right. So that's a good plan. And we can talk with Brendan and I, and Asima can discuss in detail. Okay. We'll make a plan for that. The next thing on the agenda is the holidays for the 2022-23 year and the calendar discussion. Where we left this the last time is that we had two different potential purposes for this discussion, two pieces of it. The first being the actual calendar and determining if we are meeting the needs of our community with that calendar, or we need to consider any additional, days off or timing of days off to accommodate more students' needs, and if so, how we determine that. And the second kind of fork of this discussion was raising awareness of holidays for things like no test days and things that teachers and others in the district maybe need to be more aware of in their planning process. I think some people we're going to look into some different aspects, what some other schools have done. I don't know what direction we want to go with this, but that's where we had left it. So I will open that for discussion.
Oops, sorry, Laura, go.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Laura.
Sorry, I'll try to remember to raise my hand. So I think some background information about what other school districts are doing would be helpful.
Okay.
I remember we talked about one school district. I can't remember if it was just south of the boroughs, I thought, that did have a slightly different calendar than what we had. I just don't remember the school, but we did talk about one.
Yep. And
Does anybody remember?
I don't, but I see Laura's hand is up, and I think she had done some research on some of this. So
Yeah,
she might be able to enlighten us.
Sorry, I jumped out of the call because my other computer was dying, so I had to switch over, and then it was a kind of a big mess. But anyways, I'm back now. I have gone through the holidays, and I've created a document based on some information from basically this religionfacts.com website that gave me dates of various holidays for the next 4 years. And then I also looked at some religious holidays that may or may not be an inclusive list of religious holidays that represent some of the diversity in our community. But it was at least a starting point. What I started to do, I don't know if I can share my screen, and I really don't know if it's appropriate to do that right now. But what I've done is I identified some religious holidays that were Christian that may or may not be in our school calendar right now. Some Jewish holidays, some Islamic holidays, and some Hindu holidays. And like I said, they're not necessarily a comprehensive list of holidays that would encompass all of the religious diversity that we have here in our district. And they may not even cover, they may not even be a consideration for the population that we have. That's the unknown, is what is our demographics of our community in terms of religion. I looked at the census, and you really can't get a good picture of that through the census. You can get sort of mile high view of it. So I have a document, and I'd be happy to share it with you, to at least show you the work that I've started. So for example, I took Good Friday as a Christian holiday, and I looked at the dates over the next 4 years. So that's the 22 school year, 23 school year, 24 school year, and 25 school year, so that we know what day of the year it lands on, right? And then I started doing that for Rosh Hashanah, for Yom Kippur, Eid I think is how you pronounce it, Diwali, and I have another one that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. It's the Hindu one, but I don't have dates for that one yet. But my thinking in doing that was, if we looked at all the holidays that could potentially be, that could potentially fall over the next 4 years on our calendar, that we might know the impact of the days. We might know the impact of how that impacts our 180 days, and if it would impact our 180 days at all. Maybe it's like Malia said, maybe it's just the awareness of the holiday that would be the first step. Maybe not. Maybe we really need to look at surveying our community and saying, hey, these are some holidays that we're identifying as potential holidays. Do you celebrate it? Would you need the day off to celebrate it? And if there are others that we're not identifying, please tell us what you celebrate, and would you need the day off? And that might help inform, that data might help inform our looking at the calendar. So anyways, I started that work. Like I said, I can share it with you if you would like me to put it. I don't know how to share it. I think I might have to put it on the agenda for the next time, so you could look at it, so that it's posted. So if you would like to do that, then I can give you that.
You can send it to us, since we talked about it in this meeting. I think you can send it via Brendan and Randy, and they can send it out to the whole committee as a document that we discussed.
Okay.
So that,
Brendan,
I don't think that breaks any rules, because we've talked about it.
Okay. So Brendan, you're an editor. You have access to that. So if you wouldn't mind putting that on a communication to the committee, that would be great.
Great. And you sent that to me?
I did. Do you want me to resend it to you?
Oh, no, I have it. I have it right here. Thank you.
Yep. I also took just regular holidays, and I highlighted them. I didn't give a key, but I highlighted those that we just have as regular days off during the school year. Ones that are in our already established vacation weeks, and ones that may or may not impact the school year, like Juneteenth, which is a new federal holiday. If it falls within our school year, then we would have to make it a day off. And if it doesn't happen to fall on a school day, then it wouldn't. So each year, depending on how our calendar starts and stops, it will impact that,
Yep. Okay. That sounds like a good plan. I see Linda Longbolia's hand also. Linda, you're muted.
Sorry. That's really helpful. Thank you, Laura. That was a lot of work. Thank you. I'm a little torn about the survey, only because I really like the idea of doing a survey sort of as a needs assessment, but I worry a little bit that I worry a little bit about raising people's expectations. I don't know. What do people think about that? being cautious.
Linda Woodland.
So I like the idea of starting with it as raising awareness. So if it's part of planning, if it's part of school calendars that parents are made aware of as well, I would see it as a potential door opener for, if it doesn't capture what your family needs, a way to help a family know how to be proactive and advocate for what they do need. That would be like best case scenario, I think. I don't know if that's realistic to expect or just optimistic, but I like the idea of it as opening the door to that inclusive spirit of, we can make this work for your family. We can,
Okay.
I like that idea.
So what I'm hearing is that Laura, sorry, did you have another thought, Laura?
Well, yeah, I mean, I just feel like, we could send a message, like, in an effort to increase awareness, and and be more inclusive. We're looking to find out if we're meeting the needs with our current calendar, right? Something to that effect.
Great. So I have a suggestion. I think that's a good idea. To keep talking about this. I'm looking at our clock because it's 8:30. I think it would be useful, because I'm visual, to see the list and kind of how many holidays are impacted now versus our calendar, like the thing that you've already done. I know for me would be helpful just to see kind of the scope of how many overlap with days we already have off and other things. We can certainly make a decision to do a survey now, or we can look at that data and have it on the agenda. I don't know if it would be the 5th or the meeting after that, depending on how far we get and how long the 5th takes with the attorney. But to keep it on an agenda as one of our next working items to continue working on, and decide if we're going to do a survey or a notice or some kind of communication, or we're going to do more based on what we see, because then we will all have the data. Krista?
I just have a question about, like, what we would do with the survey answers, and what you guys are thinking that you might be asking, like, or what we're going to be asking if we do that, like are we going to be asking, what religion are you, what holidays are important to you, and then if we have a majority of like 2 religions in the community, does that mean that we're not going to include the other religions that might have been mentioned, just one?
I don't know the answer to
kind
that.
of like what we're, why, so it's just, so then to me, a survey would not be necessary.
Right. I don't know. I don't know how other school districts have done that. That's one question I have. I mean, if there's a threshold that if it's, 10% or 15% of your students celebrate something, then you take it into account. I don't know. And I think we have 2 purposes, which are not competing, but they're different. So if we're looking just at days off the calendar, then we need a threshold, and we need to figure out how we're going to get that data. If we're looking at initially trying to raise awareness of these holidays in our community, or that might impact our community, then that's a different discussion. also, when I'm thinking of surveys, a question that comes to my mind is if we would want to do our own, or if there's some way we can integrate some of this data collecting, if it's 1 or 2 questions, in with something that's already happening. I know at the end of the year, the district is supposed to do a survey. I know the incoming superintendent has said he plans to do some surveying and some data collecting. So I don't know if it's something that we can approach one or both of them about including in some other survey they're doing as a target item that we would like to find this out about our district, and figure out how to get data that way as well. I mean, I think we need to figure out what we want to find out, but also, I don't know, it's just a thought.
Like what we're trying to achieve from it, like days off or
Yes.
awareness. Can we discuss that and kind of decide if that's what we're trying to achieve tonight? Have a discussion about whether or not people are hoping to get more days off, or if we just want to spread awareness.
I don't want to decide for the committee. I will see where people go. Laura has a hand up.
So, I think this is a conversation that's going to require some more time, and I see that it's 8:37, and I feel that this could be a conversation that takes up a majority of another meeting. Because I don't know that there's a consensus yet on what we would like to do. I was just trying to present some information to kind of help move this process forward. And I think that if we digest that information, and maybe add to it, because I'm not complete with all the research, but then use that as like a launch pad for another conversation at another point, just because it's getting late, and I think it's important to be mindful of time.
I think that makes sense. Personally, I am personally not acting as chair. I think that makes sense. But acting as chair, I will give everyone else a moment to weigh in on that. Are there other thoughts about direction, Linda?
I actually would. I think that I agree with Laura. I think we need to kind of hold on it. We need to save it for like the 8 o'clock portion or a 7 o'clock portion of a future meeting where we
Okay.
can have it
Great.
with us. We can have more information. We can look at what Laura had put together. So, would it be possible to move on to to the policies that we want to get on the agenda? Is that on tap for today, or is that expected to go forward?
There are 2 things. So
You're talking about the memos?
Yes. So, I think that sounds reasonable. I don't know if we need a formal motion to do it. So I have a note that Laura will send the information to Brendan. He will get it out to us. We could review it for a future meeting. Hopefully, get it on the agenda either for the 5th or the one after that, which date is escaping me right now. But the 5th was kind of an extra one just for the attorney, and we have a couple things on there, so that might take up our time. And it might be the one after that, but I think it should be on the agenda, and we can have a more detailed discussion once people have time to look over that and maybe do some other research as well, and think about it some more. Does anyone object to that? All right. So the next thing on the agenda is the gender neutrality in existing policies. There are 2 things that we did in this. Asma and I worked on a draft, which I did not get to send to you because I did send it to Brennan. We were waiting on feedback, and she said it sounds fine. So far, I don't know if any of you have feedback, but it's a draft, very much so, of some language to send out to the rest of the committee. Not the whole committee, but management or the chairs via management. To ask them to consider gender neutrality. I don't know if Brendan has the document and can put it up, or if you all would like me to send it to you for comment. It's really just a
Is it
starting.
long? Could you?
No, it's like a paragraph.
Oh,
It's very short. And then I
Can-
had linked
can
it
we read
to
it
the
now?
other two charts. Yes. I
Malia,
don't know how to
do you have it in
share
front of you? I could pull it up if.
You know, I might. Hold on. I may still have it open. Yes, I do have it open. Can I don't know how to screen share it though.
That's okay. So which what's the title of that doc?
It's the draft gender neutrality memo. I sent
Okay.
it to you.
And I think that is, yeah, so that is, I think, linked. Here is, okay.
It might be linked. Okay. I'll
No,
also put
it's
the
not
link in the
linked to the
chat.
agenda.
Okay, all
I
right.
just
So
put the
let me
link
pull
in
it
the
up here.
chat, if that helps.
Yeah, that will. And I will put it on screen too.
Hopefully that will open. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll screen share it now.
I'm not good at screen sharing.
No
I can do
worries.
it
I have
in
two
Zoom,
two
but I
monitors
can't
in
do
there.
it in.
I
don't
think
usually
it's
tell me.
the little button at the bottom. I know
Oh.
Brenna's sharing, but I think it's the button at the bottom with the arrow
Okay.
going up, I think, but I don't
So-
know for sure.
This is a draft. We can do whatever we want with this. It was, you know, it's not very complicated. It's very basic. So if there are significant language changes, we can certainly add it. Asma and I will keep talking about it. The question,
Can you
is,
just give us a few minutes to read it?
yes, go ahead.
Thank you.
Sorry. Oh, I just found a typo. Sorry. Is everyone all set? Oh, okay, I'll give you another minute. Okay. Can you give me a thumbs up if you're done? If you're all set. I can't see everyone, but I can see most of you. Okay. All right. Okay. So the first thing I will explain is that the first paragraph was because when we started working on this, we were hoping we'd have a policy done. And so the first paragraph that I started with was if we had passed the policy. And then I realized we're bringing the policy to them for this last reading at the next school committee meeting since we didn't meet this week. And so I think it's much more forceful if we say recently we have passed this policy and we're in agreement with it. However, that means we're delaying it like 3 more weeks. And I don't really know if I like that either. So the second bolded beginning was just if we didn't have that part about passing the policy, because we've only passed the policy once, we need to pass it a second time at the next school committee meeting. You know, it's open to comment. This was just really a starting point. So if you all have thoughts, please discuss and add, and then I can bring them back to Asma and we can figure out the best final version, hopefully. I mean, I'd love if we left with the final version today and then she would just tell us if she agreed or not. She's seen this. So thoughts, comments?
So at the risk of speaking too much tonight, I'm gonna
Okay.
speak. So I think that the writing of this is great. I think this is exactly the sentiment. I think you've captured the sentiment and the intent of what we're trying to accomplish with sending this memo. In terms of urgency and putting this in just the right hands at just the right time, given the fact that we are in March, and we have elections coming up in May, and we're going to be looking at a new assembly of school committee members. It feels to me like we ought to let the gender equity, gender identity support policy stand alone at the next meeting as intended to hopefully pass, and the full committee. And then at the onset of the new assembly of the school committee, we send this memo. And that will give us time to find out if the school committee passes the policy or not. But then putting this in the hands of the new assembly of the school committee, in whatever fashion that happens to take as a body. If we give it to them now, some of these folks are out anyways. So it seems like, yeah, okay, go ahead, and we'll catch you on the other side. Kind of a thing. So I just feel like I'm comfortable with using either entry depending on how the vote goes, but putting it off to distribution after the assembly of the new school committee.
Linda?
So I have largely agree with Laura. I would add one quibble. So last year, my subcommittee did that weird bridging of we passed the first reading at the previous organization of the school committee, elections happened, reorganization happened, and then we did the second reading in the now this year. And while I do not recommend that for policies, I kind of wonder if there is value in having it in, because this subcommittee dissolves in May, right? So if we have this subcommittee that worked on it, bring it to the full committee, and then ask as a courtesy from the new, the next organization to bring it back to their attention and have it bridge both organizations of the school committee. I think that would be ideal in my imagination. I don't know if that's something that that there's risk there. I guess I don't see a risk there in trying it that way, because we'll all know, whoever is back at the subcommittee will know that it was brought before the last one. It can be brought back again as ongoing business, right? I think
That makes sense. I don't know if we ever intended it to be a formal. That's something we didn't discuss, if it was something we were going to formally, read at a meeting, which may be useful in cementing it in the record, but it's not really a policy, it's a request. But reading it into the record or drawing attention to it as part of our subcommittee reports, or even asking that it be an agenda item to cover briefly. Certainly, we hadn't talked about any of that and how we would do this. We just focused on the writing of it first. So that's an interesting question. I see the other Linda Longaleo has her hand
Right.
up.
I was going to ask Linda Woodland for clarification. I think you may have just cleared it up, Malia, because as you said, I thought that this was just sort of an informal request, as opposed to a policy we'd pass at the school committee. So it wouldn't, there wouldn't be the issue of, well, I like Laura's suggestion. I thought that passing the policy related to pupil services, gender identity, in this school committee year, and then sending this out when the new committees are constituted, I think that makes sense. And since it's not a formal policy, and it doesn't have to have a first reading and a second reading, I think I think that that is a good approach. I would tend to agree that if we were actually trying to pass a new policy and needed a first reading and second reading, that we wouldn't want to have those be in different school committee years. But I think that since this is informal, I think it makes sense to do it the way Laura suggested.
Just to clarify, I wasn't saying that this needs a first reading and a second reading. I was just like comparing the processes, that was a benefit that I saw if it was
Yeah.
business that wasn't a policy to have
Well,
the bridge.
It's hopeful we won't have 2 months without meeting this year, since everyone's having elections in May. So I'm going to cross my fingers. But I guess one of my questions, no, that makes sense. I think it makes sense to, I'm saying this as me, not the chair, but I think it makes sense to wait until the policy is passed, hopefully, because that lends a lot more weight to what we're asking people to consider and why. It's not just a random request, it's in line with policies that we've agreed to. And I think that's a really helpful link. Perhaps we can keep it on our agenda just to check in about, so we can check in, and depending on how that goes, decide if we want to revisit it at some point. Because it's an unknown how many of us will be on this subcommittee next year to carry this work forward. So that's my only concern in completely waiting until we have a new subcommittee.
So at the risk of not at the risk of speaking again too much,
Don't worry.
so I would like to make a motion that, pending the outcome of the gender identity support passage, that this committee approve or give the authority to the current chair and vice chair to modify this memo. And when I say modify, I mean modify that first paragraph to reflect the outcome of the vote, and then submit that memo to the reassembling of the school committee post elections. I do not believe that I know they won't be chair and vice chair, so maybe there's a timing thing there, but I feel like we could make the motion to grant them the authority they'll still be members of our school committee at that point.
Well,
Just
I am
for
pending.
the minutes, I'm gonna need to know the wording of the motion. I've got gobbledygook
You didn't get
now.
all that? You didn't get all that?
I think
No,
I got the
typed
main
it.
points, but I'm gonna
I
need.
typed it. I'll type it in the chat. I wrote it out.
How did you get it so fast? I was typing.
I write fast.
Brendan's in there. He can see.
Keep it up pretty good.
Hold on.
So-
I might have typos.
So let me back
on.
up. Let me eliminate the word chair and vice chair and just name the members of the school committee who I'm giving the authority to submit this memo to the reassembling of the school committee.
Okay, so depending on the
Okay.
passage of the gender identity policy, this subcommittee gives the authority of member Silva and member Gustafson to modify the memo to reflect the outcome of the vote and submit to the next organization of the committee.
Of the full school committee.
Of the full school committee. I think I've got something to fix in there too.
Yeah, you were better than I was. You read faster than I typed. And I made typos, so ignore them.
Okay. All right, so the gender identity policy, does anyone have that?
The number is
Mhm.
it's called policy. Oh my god, I made a typo in that too. Oh my gosh. Okay. It's policy related to pupil services 6436.1 gender identity.
Can you say just the number again, please?
In the chat.
It was numbered
Oh, thank you.
6431.1. Yes, thank you. And I put policy in there twice, so ignore the first policy word. Clearly, my autocorrect was not working lately.
All right, so I made the motion, right? And we got the wording of the motion.
Yeah,
I ask
I mean,
a
Asima
point of
would
information?
still be on the subcommittee.
We can't
the
discuss
committee
it
item.
until it's been seconded, right?
Right.
I'll second it.
Right. Okay. And Linda Longbalil has a question.
I do. Just to clarify, I guess I thought that we were sending it straight to the other committees and not to the chair of the. So I guess I'm confused. I guess the language of the motion is a little confusing to me in terms of the process. I'm totally on board with Malia and Asma revising the language as needed based on the outcome of the motion of the on the new
Of the
policy.
vote.
Yeah, right. The vote. Thank you. But I'm confused as to the process after that. I thought we were just going to send it to the other committees and not go through.
Yeah.
Did I understand that we would have to go through the chair of the school committee? Based
Well,
on Laura's
I
motion?
think I think that is technically the way in which I could be wrong. I thought that was
Okay,
how we
cool.
technically had to communicate to the other chairs as a formal part of the
Okay.
body via the chair of the school committee. Or we can
Okay.
send it to the management subcommittee and that will capture anyone who is a chair of another committee. But we can change that language, certainly.
No, if you
but
just explained it
technically
to
has
me.
go through that.
You just explained it to me, so that helps. So thank you. So I'll support the motion.
I could
As
be
is.
wrong. I could be wrong in that. But
All
that
right,
was
so
my
I'm going
understanding.
to make an amendment to that motion to clarify that it ought to go to the chair, the next chair of the next chair of the school committee to take up with management subcommittee.
Okay. And I will take out Mike's name from it then. I will say through whoever chair of.
Shoot.
Does that make sense?
All right, we've got 2
Good.
more minutes till 9 o'clock.
Yes. No rush. We'll get to it. No.
Well, except for
Okay,
James
so
and-
submit to the next
and-
chair
get it.
of the
I get that.
reorganized management subcommittee. Is that what you said?
I would just say the next chair of the, we could either say the next chair of the school committee, or we can say to the management committee via the chair, which is what the memo says. Well, the memo said, yeah, that's essentially what the memo
Okay,
says.
so for the minutes and for the motion that we're going to potentially second, it's submit to the chair, the next chair of the full
Could
school
we say,
committee
yes,
to distribute, or sorry, fill in the last gap. The
we
last
could say
verb.
to the next chair. Okay, let me think. 2 subcommittee chairs via the chair of the reorganized school committee. Does that make sense? Or is that too
I
confusing?
guess I don't see what's different from the original motion. Here, this is what I had in the original. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. The next chair.
Is it
Yeah, that
adding the
actually makes
phrase
sense
to
because the
be
memo itself
discussed
says
to
to vice
management?
chairs. Yeah. I think this makes sense because the memo itself says 2 subcommittee chairs via chair. So this would be in alignment with that.
So then is the amendment necessary, or is it?
No, I
Unnecessary.
retract my amendment. That's fine.
Okay.
Okay. So we have a motion. Does anyone else have a discussion on the motion? Okay. And we had a second. Okay. So we'll vote on the motion. Let's see if we can get it done. Okay. Do we need to read the motion again?
Oh.
Okay, great. All right. So all in favor in the motion as stated. I can't do it that way because we're remote. So okay, I'll do a roll call vote. Just the order I see you all on my screen. Member Woodland,
Woodland, yes.
Member Beardmore,
Beardmore, yes.
Member Kirschenbaum,
Mom, yes.
Member Long Balil,
Longbeliel, yes.
Member Bennett,
Bennett, yes.
and I vote yes. Great, the motion passes. Okay. The next item is continued policy review, which will be, unless someone else has additional comments, will be addressed at our April 5th meeting, at least the harassment policy. I don't know if there are additional policies we need to consider that are burning in anyone else's mind. Okay, so we'll pass over that until April 5th. Are there items for new business in the future?
I wrote down DEI work for the school committee members from our earlier discussion. Does that reflect it accurately?
Yes.
Oh, yes, thank you. DEI work, yes.
And just to be clear, we'll pick up some of these things that we did not fully address, like the calendar and all that stuff. We'll pick up.
Yes,
next.
those will stay on the agenda
Got
as
it.
continued items, and we'll figure, at
Okay.
least that's what usually happens.
Yep, great.
Are there any other new items to add? Okay. We have our next meeting scheduled. I believe it's April 5th. I don't
sorry,
have the
can I
time
back
in
up
front of me.
I'm sorry, can you back up just a minute on new business?
Absolutely.
Do we have data on instances of bullying and harassment or other behavioral infractions that have occurred throughout the year by school? Does that data exist as an aggregate?
That is a good question, and I think that was actually in my notes from the last meeting, and I forgot to write it down,
Yeah.
so thank you.
So I would just request from, from our staff that if that data does exist, that it be brought to a future meeting so that we can at least see, what we're dealing with.
Okay. Great. Is there anything else to be added to new business? Okay. So I'm just checking my calendar to make sure that there's nothing I'm missing. Okay. I think we're good. Okay. All right. The next meeting is scheduled for April 5th. And then I think that is we have 2 more after that. And we also have, I think, 2 school committee meetings after that. So the gender identity hopefully can be put on the agenda for the next school committee meeting. I don't know when we have the next one, I think in 3 weeks. So hopefully we'll have one before then. I suspect we might, I don't know, but at least the next regular meeting. We have 2 regular meetings left. So hopefully we can get it done.
Can I ask a
And I don't think
question?
we need to. Yes.
Sorry, about the next putting it on the agenda of the full committee. Has that been
Mhm.
already asked of
Yeah.
Mike and Randy?
Yes. Yeah. And the open question is about whether it would be first or second reading. Now that we haven't changed the policy, we just added the legal references. So Randy is looking into that question.
I will be curious to hear that because we did do some other policies this year that were considered second readings after they made changes requested by the committee. And they were considered second readings with those changes. So hopefully that will be the case because that happened with education policies. So that would be great if that were the case. Cross our fingers. Okay. Agenda for next meeting. I think we've covered that. So I think we are all set to adjourn. I know Brendan has one more meeting with us. Will you be with us the 5th?
I will.
Okay.
Yeah, with Matt. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Then I won't go into my long thank you now. I'll wait until that time. But I hope your new adventures will take you somewhere exciting. But we can go into that next time. Okay. Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Great. We have to do a vote. Member Woodland,
Woodland, yes?
Member Beardmore,
Beardmore, yes.
Member Kirschenbaum,
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Member Long Balil,
Longborough, yes.
Member Bennett,
Bennett, yes.
and I vote yes. And the meeting is adjourned 9:06. That's so close. We almost made it. So,
Excellent.
thank you all.
Thank you.
Good work. We're making
Thanks,
progress.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.